Okay, welcome to UTOKing with Gregg. I'm super excited to have Professor Darcia Narvaez here with us today. She's one of my favorite thinkers in the world of psychology. She's a professor at University of Notre Dame, done all sorts of wonderful work. Indeed, when I had the opportunity to be a program chair of theoretical and philosophical psychology, I knew instantaneously who I wanted to invite as the keynote speaker, and it was Darcia. She came and gave a beautiful talk on some of the things that I hope we talk in today. One of my favorite books of all time, she has there, and she wrote it, Neurobiology, Development, Human Morality, Evolution, Culture, and Wisdom. Darcia, thanks so much for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be with you.
It's really, it's wonderful to have you here. So maybe we can just start with a little bit of your story and your background and how you got wound into ultimately or fell into or whatever the place that you did. But where did it start for you? Give us a little bit of your background.
Well, it's complicated.
Yeah, often is.
Yeah. I think my interest in early childhood started when I was a child living in other countries. I spent half my childhood in Spanish-speaking countries, and I would see kids my own age on the corner selling gum, chiclets, barefoot rags,
right,
trying
sure.
to make money for their family dinner or something.
Right.
And I would come back to the States because we'd be away for a year and come back for 2 years and then go away for a year. Come back to the States and then just was appalled at the injustice. It's like, how can we have 100 types of cereal and there's someone there with no food?
Right.
And so that always, I used to cry over these children.
Mm-hmm.
But
so your sense of kinship with humanity runs deep, as I've always known.
It does, and it's global. I mean, it's not like
humanity, right? Right. No, that's a big H, capital H there.
Yeah. Yeah, and but I have a lot of interests. So my college career started out as a world language major, ended up as a music major, pipe organ, and so I went to being a church musician. But I also taught in the Philippines K-12 music because that opportunity arose, and that was interesting. And then I felt called to the ministry. I was raised a Lutheran.
Right.
Missouri Synod, which is fundamentalist and doesn't allow women to have leadership roles over men. And so being called to ministry was like, well, I guess I'll go to hell. All right, got to follow the heart,
I know that.
So I went to a Lutheran seminary where they had, not Missouri Synod, but another one where they were starting to allow women to be ordained. And then when I was there, I realized that I really wasn't a Lutheran. I couldn't preach the doctrine.
Right.
And so although it's...
I was going to say, I don't think this was written by a fundamentalist Christian, so something must have happened.
Yeah, a lot of things happened. So I got my degree and certified, but I never got ordained to be a minister because I couldn't, face being lying in the pulpit or something. But it got me interested in grad school.
Okay.
And so that was a good thing. But I didn't do that right away. I had my own business teaching Spanish to adults using super learning, which is relaxation and drama and games, and getting the brain all relaxed so that you can learn more easily. And then I worked in the Hispanic community in Minnesota. And I then got a job offer at a prep school to teach Spanish to middle school students.
Wow.
And when I was a music teacher, I remembered which age I hated. It was so hard. Middle school. Oh, universe is calling you. You gotta, face it. So I went, and first year was hellish, but I loved the kids. Stayed there 4 years. But in the middle of that, I found my vocation of moral development. So I had been my seminary professor had recommended that I be on a committee that studied the common good for Lutheran World Ministries, where we read books and met twice a year, and we're going to write some volume or something. And I got assigned Carol Gilligan's book in a different voice. And so my bishop friend said, oh, we should talk to my neighbor, Jim Rust, because he does moral development. So I went to talk to him. He taught at the University of Minnesota.
Mhm.
And he said, "Oh, read my latest book." So I read his latest book and I go, "Oh, this is what I want to study." And so I applied to work with him
Okay.
at Minnesota.
Yeah.
Then I ended up falling in love with him. So I had to switch advisors.
Well,
And yeah,
that happens.
that happens. I know. So I ended up, my dissertation was not quite the same as what I expected, but it was fine. It was moral discourse processing because my advisor was in reading comprehension.
Was this would you get your doctorate in developmental psychology? Was that the actual
educational psychology?
Okay.
That's
Gotcha.
where moral development was. Learning
Right.
cognition,
Right. Okay.
the area, foundations. And then I married my advisor, former advisor, and he had a degenerative disease though, and so he went to the dean and asked if I could share his job, because he was having more problems. And the dean saw my vita and said, "No, we'll give you your own job."
Okay.
So I ended up getting a tenure track job there and got tenured there. And my husband died, and so I had been, when I was there, I was doing lab studies. That's what I'd done with my advisor, my second advisor, and they put me in a curriculum and instruction department primarily instead of ed psych. And that they started telling me right before the last couple of years of my tenure decision, that I had to do curriculum instruction. Luckily, there was federal money for character education. $1 million was set aside per state.
Wow.
And Minnesota had not asked for theirs. And so I wrote a grant for that. And luckily, I couldn't submit it myself, it turned out. I found someone at the Department of Education to be partner with me, and then we submitted and got that money. So
beautiful.
that ensured my tenure. So I got into education.
I know how that works.
Yeah, helping teachers across the state shape their regular instruction, academic instruction, so that they're also teaching ethical or moral skills, ethical skills. We call it ethical because moral sounds, it's about sex, right? No. And then Notre Dame, when my husband died, Notre Dame had been trying to get me to come and give a talk and see if I wanted to come over here because they like my vita. And so I ended up moving to Notre Dame in 2000. And in Notre Dame, there's no education department. And so I tried to work with the schools, but No Child Left Behind came in. And then had 2 hours a week in a middle school to work on character education. But a new superintendent came in and reorganized things, and they ended up with 2 minutes a week. Yeah. So our year-long collaboration.
Character on the fly.
That was the end of that. So then I started to, I always read widely anyway, but I stumbled into hunter-gatherer childhoods and the anthropological research on peaceful societies, that breastfeeding matters, 2.5 years of breastfeeding. And lots of touch and neuroscience, how important, what the mammal brain looks like, what are the emotion systems, and how early experience shapes what happens. Alan Shore's work and attachments.
Concept who write something
in the book, right? So like, oh my God, my mind was exploding. Like, how did they not tell me this in graduate school?
Somebody forgot we were primates.
Yeah. So that's been my story since I found that. I was like, oh my God, we got to change everything. Morality starts in the womb.
Beautiful. Right. Yeah. Actually, that's a really nice segue into some really key things. One of the most beautiful things you articulate, in my estimation, is the thing called the evolved nest. And I'd like to evolve in a conversation towards that. But maybe you can talk a little bit about what you mean by character education and moral development at that stage, and then how you came to see, sort of this embodied, embedded, indigenous view over time. So let's start with sort of like, how did you approach character education at that stage? And then you evolved into this more holistic, rich, indigenous view over time. So I'd like to really track that for folks.
Yeah. So when I started grad school, there was still the bias towards reasoning, and that's what morality is about. As long as you make a good decision and you have the will to follow it, that's morality, and then you're a good person, right? My husband, late husband, Jim Rust, pointed out that there's much more involved. that you have to notice. Well, I call it moral perception. You have to notice there's an issue, right? And you have to be aware that you have a role to play. Someone's house is on fire or a child's running in the street. Are you going to do anything? Well, you're gauging very quickly whether the mother's nearby, how old the child is, if you yell at them or you have to run after them or whatever. All that sensitivity and perception and not judgment per se. It's not reasoning about what's the most moral thing to do, which is important. But then there's motivation, there's identity. Is this if you're in a Brahmin in India and you're walking by an untouchable, you're not going to want to help them because your cultures and your identity is, you stay away from them, right? So, and then there's action capacities. So how skilled are you at doing something? There was a guy who jumped down and saved a woman who fell on the subway track in New York City some years ago. Right?
I remember that story.
He rolled her off the track and all this, and everyone says, why doesn't everybody do that? Well, this guy was Marine, had been a Marine, and he trained for all sorts of things like that. So there's an expertise, a self-efficacy, the ability to, to have confidence to do, and then to have the ego strength to persevere, right? You might have wanted to, and you did save Jews in your attic from the Nazis, but then the family starts to complain and say, we want to go on vacation to the mountains. All right, bye everybody.
Sorry.
You gave up, right? Ego persistence. Dissolved because of the pressure, whatever it is. So, morality is a lot more complicated. So what we did with our teachers we developed books, guidebooks. We took these, we call them 4 components. So ethical sensitivity, ethical judgment, ethical motivation, and ethical action. And we then split those into skills, 7 skills each. And then we talked to the teachers, we're collaborating with them, and saying, well, why don't you come up with sub-skills? Because that wasn't detailed enough yet. And they said, no, you do it. And so for each of the 7 skills out of the 4 components, we developed multiple sub-skills.
Wow. Okay. So, you got 28 categories and now all of a sudden.
Okay. Then we put them into books based on a novice to expert learning pedagogy. Right. Okay. So if your students know nothing, all right, give them the big picture. So you give them the big picture, and here are some activities you can do, for social studies, for science, for this and that. And then if they already know the big picture, then you got to focus in on some skills and details. All right, here's some suggestions for that. If they already have that much, well, now they got to practice procedures. How do they apply it, in this way or that way, or combine skills. And then once they've gotten that far, then you go to across context. Can they do it across context? So when you learn to swim, you were probably a baby at the swimming pool or the lake or the ocean, and you saw people interacting. That's the big picture. You say, oh, these people are moving through the water. Wow. And then you start to practice. You start to kick your own legs or your arms, whatever. Yeah, those are skills, right? Then you have to put them together, the procedures, right? Arms and legs. And then you want to be able to swim in the pool, but also in the lake, right? So that's across context. So that's the approach we used. And then the books they're available online. We can put a link somewhere if there are teachers.
I can put links in the show notes.
The earlier versions of them. We also have published versions that are like $15 each. And so it gives you all the background information and then, hundreds of ideas what to do, plus other stuff.
How did you feel that was implemented? Did you feel that kids could really learn this and absorb it and make a real difference in their?
Good question. Yeah. So it depended on the school. Okay. So we did a pre-post evaluation year, the last year. We had a comparison school where they didn't do anything. And then we had different levels of integration that schools did. So we had suggested the ultimate
Cadillac version.
The Cadillac version was to do things in homeroom or advisory period, to do school-wide activities, as well as integrate into every subject matter. And so there was a school or two that did that. And then there are other schools that just did homeroom advisory or just did a few of the classes or something like that. And we found that made a difference, right? So,
clearly trained as a behavioral scientist. You have good, you can break out and develop little ideas about what mechanisms might be operating and what totalities might be operating. That's good to see. Not that I'm surprised given your training, but I just noted.
But the problem with our approach was what we call a common morality. We present you these whole set of skills, sub-skills, and the method, novice to expert pedagogy.
Mm-hmm.
You, the teachers, educators, the team, hopefully a parent on the team, whoever's deciding here, you have to decide what your students need, what your community needs, and select the skills that you're going to address, and how and who and when. And then so everybody has so that's a common morality, because it comes to a unique implementation that nobody else does it the same way, right? So that's like, how do you measure this? Oh my.
Clearly, right.
Yeah, so that's an issue, right? But that's local control. That's what you want.
Yeah. And you did that for a couple of years, and then when did you then begin to make the shift from our sort of traditional psychological, Kohlberg into Gilligan morality, or whatever, wherever you were in relationship to that education, and then you started to evolve into a more indigenous perspective, right?
Well, I was always interested in more in the expertise. That's the cognitive science part I brought to that approach. That it's not enough to think. You need know-how. Of all kinds. And what is that? How do you become a master? And so, I think in the writing of the book is how I transformed, right? I had a book proposal that was different than what the book turned out to be. I mean, that's kind of normal, I guess. But the book taught me, it led me to the indigenous perspective. It's like all these things.
Is it this book you're referring to?
Yeah, that book.
Like your classic. You have several, so I just want to be clear.
That book, yeah. Right. So it took me a while to write. It took a year to get all the permissions. They made me get all the permissions. If you had more than 300 words quoted from anybody, to get permission. Yeah. But so it was in the works. I wrote an earlier article published in 2008, which was the initial kind of blow your mind kind of view that, neurobiology matters for morality. Come on, if you're stressed, you're not going to think as well. And we know your blood flow shifts, it goes to your muscles, you're going to fight, flight, whatever it is. You're not going to observe and think in the detached way that the Western world prefers, or has been preferring lately. And so you have to pay attention to who you are, and you can create personalities that are very oriented and racing against the other, and then they rationalize whatever it is that they externalize, right, and blame others for. And we see so much of that.
I've seen that occasionally in the clinic room, but
yeah, it's all over the country now. So when you undercare for kids, when you don't provide the evolved nest, you're going to end up then with these easily stressed brains, triggered, right? And that's such a common phrase now, because we forgot how you raise a well-functioning human being. We forgot what basic needs are for young people, and for us too, right? And a lot of parents are oriented to the animal needs, nourishment, shelter, warmth, as if that's enough. No. Babies need play, and they need affection and bonding. They need multiple caregivers they bond with so they can practice different ways of being with other people. They need, to be involved in community activities. So they're actually, growing their capacities as well. I mean, there's lots of things that we forgot. And we isolate kids in their own age groups. That's crazy. That makes competition rather than cooperation. They love to learn from older kids, and the older love to teach the younger and, hang out.
Right.
So we've gone in the wrong direction in so many ways, in part because of the focus on money making. Capitalism has really, civilization, I think 10,000 years or so ago, started to shift us away from the evolved nest, from meeting basic needs, because hierarchy then starts to, because you get hierarchy with civilization, and then that starts to neglect basic needs because you're just trying to keep the system going to feed the top, right?
Yep. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. We'll make a UTOKing bridge here. So I like to talk about the body at the core organism to animal level. So that's your, core fight, flight, pleasure, pain. You got to have survival, got to have territorial needs kind of regulated at some level. The base of the Maslow, but then there's the heart, really, the primate heart. And that primate heart is the attachment system, the felt sense of affiliation, the felt sense of belonging, or the polyvagal threat defense system that you're about ready to be ejected, or you're isolated, or you're disconnected, or you're in an alien environment. And that the fundamental difference in how to create a webbed, felt sense of being known and valued across multiple socio-relational contexts is crucial, and clearly something our society is, well, not optimizing.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah.
To say it kindly.
Yep.
Jesus. And then something, so, and the other thing to be very aware of, here's a frame that I like, and I think that, be very consistent. So yeah, about 10 to 5, 12, wherever, thousands, but certainly by 5,000 years ago, huge transition from an oral, indigenous, nomadic, horticultural lifestyle back into real full-fledged hunter-gatherer lifestyles 100,000 years ago, creates a particular type of oral, indigenous relational network between individuals and the world, the natural world. Across lots of different environments, what I will invite you then to talk about is, despite a wide variety of different hunter-gatherer, of course, environments and contexts, there are also some real threads that emerge in these cultures and contexts and hunter-gatherer societies that really speak to our evolved human natures. And so I want you to talk about that. I want folks to, and people will be aware of it, but let's really be clear that there was then a shift into agriculture and the evolution of certain kinds of technologies that tip us into civilization. This civilization then was defined really by cities and the network of cities. And the thing about cities is they basically create a completely different kind of technological bubble, organized technological bubble that's radically different than the hunter-gatherer societies lived in. It also one of the things that's very different that I think you're speaking to is, resource distribution now becomes radically different. You can hold on to resources. There becomes an opportunity for a dramatic hierarchical structure in human organization. There are needs for it. If you're going to have 5,000 people living in a city, there's needs for it, but there's also then opportunities for dramatic differentiation of resources. And so we really see then human civilization through Bronze Age evolved, and there's the Bronze Age collapse. We see a reemergence of, civilization societies, the Axial Age. So for me, this is all then the emergence of traditional formal civilization in our period. And things like writing, cities, money change, and our other technologies radically change, the old indigenous oral nature structure. Then we also get another huge change about 500 years ago with, modernity, the shift into capital labor relations, the emergence of sort of hyper-rationalistic scientific capacities, massive technological changes, emerging globalization. Over the last 50, what's that? Colonization. Yeah, well, actually, I was going to weave that into the final 50 years, or more or less, everything's there rough. You get a postmodern critique of modernity, both in terms of some of its claims to, some of the scientific claims, and most notably the justice claims, and care about Earth, care about marginalized voices. So for me, I like to think about the evolution of human sort of cultural conscious sensibilities through the oral, indigenous, traditional, formal, modern, and then postmodern. And somehow, is there a way to see that and pull the insights from those? And in particular, what I really love what you're doing is there's an enormous amount of grounding insights for wise living from the oral indigenous traditions that we need to somehow remember. And I think you're an absolute leader in that. So I just wanted to lay that out for folks and then see if you wanted to pick up on any of that threading.
Just one thing to add is the nature disconnection. So with the scientific revolution and the philosophical Western Enlightenment, the natural world was assumed to be dead and inert. I mean, Descartes and all that mattered was the mind and the humans and white males, essentially. Everything else was, to be used and manipulated. Totally. So I think that's really still here.
Yep.
And we are, it's so infused that we don't realize it's everywhere, and that bias against the body and the bias against nature and the past, the past, we don't want to go back to living in huts, blah, 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 as if we're not saying that. We're saying honor your genes, your ancestry, and what your social mammalian nature needs.
Beautiful.
And people seem to, that's really hard to take in because they think progress, progress, progress. That's what the left brain, this is left brain dominant thinking is, oh, we're great. And, what, you feel something? Oh, no, that's ridiculous. Or transpersonal, transrational, spiritual stuff. Ah, that's ridiculous. That's the left brain, right? So only wants static, dead things to manipulate and categorize, and anything, you can see and touch. That's it. Everything else is false, and so you feel terribly anxious because that's no way to live.
It's kind of disembodied.
Disembodied, but death is coming. Whoa.
Oh, totally. It sounds like I don't know, but I heard some echoes of maybe Ian McGilchrist's work at all.
Yeah,
I don't know
right.
if that informs some of your articulation of that. I know you have your own rich tradition in speaking to that, but I just heard some of those echoes, so I thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, and he argues in The Master and His Emissary that the Western world has been taken over by left brain dominance rather than an integrated brain orientation. And I argue based on Ellen Shore, that the right hemisphere is underdeveloped. In early life. When you don't provide the nest, then you have gaps and you don't feel good about yourself. You're not regulated. Your empathy is low. All sorts of things that are right governed, at least early on, don't develop properly. And the vagus nerve is part of that. And then when you in your adulthood, you feel like you have a gap in yourself. Who am I? You're kind of hollow.
Totally. Clinically, I see that all the time. The egoic justification system is not provide. The development hasn't provided the coherent integration across body, heart, mind, and spirit. And I mean that, just a trans egoic sense of oneness with whatever that affords you a realization that it's not just your damn life. It's actually your life is a thread in a larger tapestry, right?
Like that.
But we don't teach that, especially the capital labor egoic, Trump version of it's not exactly clear that the ego isn't all right. It's like, no, we do way too much of that. So, and then how the ego tries to, with its anxious defensive structure and its own emptiness or darkness, tries to kind of justify and rationalize and identify what the threats are on the outside. I mean, it's a really, really common narrative that manifests itself in a lot of depressed, anxious, angry, irritable struggles that we have. And we have to figure out what's going on. And I think you really diagnose a huge part of this with the evolved nest. We haven't really explicitly stated that. So how about we take some time and help people understand what you mean by this concept?
Sure. Yeah. So we are embodied creatures. We are biosocial. Means our biology is constructed by our social experience, and our social capacities are shaped by our biology. So we're just kind of this intertwining of epigenetics, plasticity, of co-construction by our experience of who we become. And with undercare, I'll talk about the nest in a second. When you don't have the nest, you're undercared for, and you then develop all these defenses. And it's like your real self is locked down in this chamber or prison, and you've locked it all in because nobody attended to you and to that uniqueness, and so you had to hide it, right? And then to unlayer it, my goodness, it takes so much time with therapy and other things. So the nest. So we have 9 components we've identified now, and these are apparent in our small band hunter-gatherer cousin communities. And apparent throughout for probably a million years of our existence in cooperative companionship societies. And we have a movie people should see, 6-minute movie, breakingthecyclefilm.org.
I just actually watched it prior to Gloria's movie. We'll put it in the show notes here. It's a beautiful, quick, in this time age, but it really hits the home the point. So we'll put that in the links too.
Yeah, so the first component of the nest then is the soothing perinatal experiences. So prenatal, gestationally, the mother feels supported so that the biochemistry is going on well for that baby's growth, and doesn't develop into irritability, which stress, high cortisol levels, and affect the baby's then irritability after birth, which makes it harder to care for that baby. So, and the birth is soothing, and there's no separation of the baby from the mother. There's no painful procedures, no circumcision, no, any harsh lights and such. And then there's time for the mom and baby to bond. Their reward systems are highly energized during natural birth to glom onto each other and just completely meld into that intersubjectivity, the resonance. And if you interfere with that, then that can be, the energy flows away, right? It's like interrupting someone having sex, right? And then, all right, then start back in where you were. Oh, now it's not going to work, right? So, so that's soothing perinatal experience. The baby's needs are met early on. They're kept calm. Very important to keep that baby calm for the biochemistry to work well for its growth.
So I'll make a comment just about a few of these. So the basically the basic sense of the animal body, whether it's stressed and pressed or relaxed and safe, is crucial in the basic structural organization. Okay, and then the priming of birth creates all sorts of flux in the system. Okay, and then the flux in the system is really primed to get harmonized in resonance. And that's what you're talking about in relationship to the attachment system very early on is then going to be tracking. If you track some of the early, there's rooting reflex, of course. There's experience of needing to be held. There's eye-to-eye contact. There's rhythmic, bodily, affective relating. And essentially what I would say is basically what you have is the attachment system, okay, coming online and trying to get co-regulated very early in relationship to the process and the syncing up of that, of mother offspring in a positive network, looping where you can signal attention, care, knowing and value what the needs are, feedbacking loop that creates one particular kind of structure. You disrupt that structure, like you said, and then all of a sudden the vulnerabilities and the possibilities of that developmentally then getting stacked into all sorts of different other kinds of issues. Very, very concerning. So we're trying to lay the groundwork here for an evolving, secure attachment dance relationship that then gets internalized in the system and gets layered on top of that through developmental experiences.
Very good. Yeah. So it's a trajectory of wellness, right? So when you provide that, and if you don't provide it, then you're now risk factors, all sorts of risk factors for a trajectory of trauma and illness and ill-being that just accumulate over time too. So then the second one is breastfeeding on request, and that's from the beginning. Colostrum has vitamin K and helps the baby with immunity, and the immediate breastfeeding helps the mother with prevent hemorrhaging and such. And under natural conditions, the baby will actually crawl up and manipulate the nipple to start the milk and the oxytocin flow and then let down, which is all related. And that breast milk is tailored to the gender of the child, tailored to whether they're in a growth spurt or not. Different amounts of fat are provided. If there's an infectious agent in the region, the mother's body produces an antibody. It's just this magic elixir. We hardly understand it, but it's got all the immunoglobulins needed for the immune system development. It's 80% alive, all sorts of enzymes, feeding the microorganisms for a healthy gut. Most of the immune system is in the gut. And so you don't want to feed anything else because the breast milk also provides a biofilm through the intestines and the digestive system to keep out infectious agents. And once you start feeding something else, it breaks that biofilm. So you want to have exclusive breastfeeding for as long as possible. And for our ancestral context, the average, what's been observed is 2.5 years to 8 years of breastfeeding.
Wow.
Average age weaning.
That would change some of the norms at 8 years. You just blew some of the, what? Did you say 8? And it's like, yeah, it goes pretty far.
It's actually been observed too at other ages, like 11. And so, but
well, we can pause at 8. That's it. We'll go far enough at that juncture.
We're just so,
right. Obviously, we're talking about sex here. This is making me feel funny.
Right. Yeah. So why 4 years? Because it's got immunoglobulins. It's building everything the brain and body needs, right? It's got tryptophan, which is a precursor of serotonin, and it makes the baby sleepy. It produces that, the breasts produce that in the evening. So you don't want to give evening milk during the day. So you have to mark your pumping. You've got to mark your bottles when you got that milk.
Really? I didn't know that.
because the early morning milk is giving energy boosting elements. So you need to be careful about when you're giving which kind of milk.
Fascinating.
In the bottle, yeah. And so tryptophan is...
It's like nature really fine-grained that stuff, huh?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Who'd have thunk it?
And our milk is thin, of a thin variety. Predator milk is thick so that the mom can go off and hunt. Okay. Ours is thin, which means that the baby is supposed to be ingesting it frequently because it's mostly sugars, and it's got all these things that are building the brain, and the brain is growing so rapidly, thousands of synapses or brain connections are growing every second. And so on average, every 20 minutes at first for a newborn, full-term birth, because the stomach is so tiny anyway, so it empties right away. And so and in our ancestral context, anybody will suckle a child if the child starts to get fussy, and you pay attention to, whether it's starting to make a face or whatever it is. Of course, you're on bodies all the time in these contexts. And then you move in and do something. And the best response is always to suckle, even if it's a guy or a grandma. They'll put the baby to the nipple because it's very calming. It's sort of like external pacifier, right?
Right.
Embodied pacifier.
Fascinating. Yeah. And that brings up, well, maybe that will become about, but certainly a distributed network of caregivers is something that is part of the structure as well. Maybe that's down the line, but you're certainly alluding to that.
We can talk about it. I mean, the order is arbitrary almost, except for birth.
Right.
So yeah, allo parents or allo mothers or other mothers other than the mom. That's how usually it's considered. And that's these people are there, and at least the research that in the West has shown at least 3 people in love with a baby is important. So it's mom, dad, usually, and grandma, usually something like that.
Right.
And so they're all there available. Now, in our ancestral context, the mother's typically always around for a young child, but half the time the young child's being held by someone else. The mother's nearby so that if there's some issue that can't be settled by someone else, the mom can move in.
Right.
So it's not that you have allo parents and the mom leaves and goes off to work and never is around. So that we're doing some very risky things now, even if they are attached to the alternatives, not the non-moms, caregivers. Right. But these people are really needed for mom to be responsive to her child. So in our ancestral context, in the studies that have been done with primates, and moms are not going to be responsive if the community is not welcoming to that child, to that offspring.
Yep.
And so I think we can see that too. Well, it's also because we stress parents so much now in the States that they can't be responsive, right?
Right.
You got to go to work in 6 weeks, so I'm not going to breastfeed my baby. That's what moms, I don't want to touch my baby, after birth. It's really crazy stuff we've done. We've broken, there's a caregiving attachment system also, of wanting to care for that child. That's part of that bonding early on.
It's the dance. It's the attachment dance is a two-way, absolutely.
Right. And so we've stressed that to the breaking point for many moms, I think. And then they have children, and they don't feel like they want to hold them. And Bruce Perry writes about this in his book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, which is a lot of different cases. So alloparents really important. Stephanie Kuhn says most societies have thought that child raising is too important to be left to parents alone.
Yep. Sounds like some good wisdom, no doubt. Not that we follow that. In fact, we put an enormous amount of pressure on parents to be almost the sole caregivers in many contexts.
And the responsive caregivers, the allo parents are going to be the same people, right? Stable relationships, not a stranger daycare. That's not going to work because the child needs a responsive, ongoing relationship with multiple people. Because you develop stories together, you develop little routines together. You're not a stranger. The baby feels like they're known. Really important, right? Known and loved. And so the child care issue now that's going around. I mean, we really need parental leave pay for like 3 years. Let's do that. We need to pay the billionaires. Let's pay the parents.
Right.
Everybody gets it, no matter who you are. Right.
Super crucial. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
All right. So then there's affection, positive affection, and no negative touch. So positive touch. And babies expect to be moved a lot because we evolved to be mobile. And
my kids love to be walked all the time, especially two of them were they love, they definitely like, get up and walk me around. It's like, all right.
Brain development, but it also helps digestion because it's moving the cilia in the digestive tract that need stimulation early on. So birth is good. Vaginal birth is good because it stimulates the immune system, stimulates intelligence. Some research is showing. And if you have a cesarean, those things don't happen. So then you got to massage the baby and do other interventions to make up for it. So positive touch is pretty constant, 24/7. That's maternal presence usually, or caregiver presence. Not isolation, not in their own room, not in their own bed, not in their carrier half the day or playpen. No, on your body. That's our need. But we do all sorts of experiments now on kids, and then we look at them and we think, what's wrong with these people? Right? When they grow up.
What happened to them? Oh, we did.
Yeah. Oh, not me. I was spanked and I'm fine.
Right. Well.
So the negative touch, we know now that spanking long-term is just like emotion or physical abuse. Negative outcomes on children. So, but in the States, half of parents report spanking their 1-year-old children.
1 year old. Wow. Yeah. No, that's we should be also clear, I think, or at least I'll throw this out there. The time frame here is really key. These early 6 months, early 2 year, this infant development period is really to avoid harmful touch and to maintain responsivity, sort of on-demand breastfeeding, that kind of thing. Would you say it's particularly important, in this early period, or is it just or for you, sort of like, hey, it's just crucially all the way through? I mean, it's certainly important all the way through. I'm just wondering if you see sort of developmental sensitive periods where it's particularly heightened.
Yeah, the earlier is more sensitive, and it's again setting that trajectory. So you want to have the right trajectory going. If you start to risk factors, you degrade the trajectory and things start to mess up and just accumulate snowballs, right?
Okay.
So it's early, but I would say till about age 6, things really have to go well, ideally. And then you've got a resilient person. And they will be confident and they will feel at home in the world, and they will be able to do anything almost. You can see this in some of the homeless kids in Africa where they had a good beginning, and then they're actually controlling their lives, even though they're the street children. They're able to do things without the aggression and the harm making, hurtful behaviors that we see and think is normal.
Right. So it's really built in the human primate architecture. And you'll actually see, at 6 is a time when they start become, quasi persons at the level of responsibility and justification and regulation. It's really getting the architecture of that that happens in the first 6, the ground of that, the primate ground of that in the right developmental track is what I'm hearing.
I'd probably not call it primate. There's I'm just learning about this rather recently, that our shift 1 million years ago or so, maybe it's not that far back, but anyway, we developed a very big social brain. We shifted away from the apes.
Yeah.
And the apes are hierarchical, at least the chimps.
Right.
And we shifted to a huge brain. And the dominant hypothesis, I think, is that social brain required this cooperative nesting, cooperative child raising.
Good. Totally.
And the control of females over the male's alpha male behavior. And so they would fool them with who's fertile or not, and have some rituals, full moon rituals and all this stuff, where they went hunting And then because you need meat for this big brain.
Mm-hmm.
So you need the males to go and hunt, feed the children. And mothers had some control over that. And so we didn't get the big alpha males that we have dominating the world now, in part because of this social brain shift, which requires mind reading, requires and moved into egalitarianism, which apes don't have as much, although bonobos
definitely not. So I mean, it's maybe you are. I certainly would rely on Michael Tomasello's work in this area. His work on becoming human and theory of ontogeny. It certainly speaks to very much these. I know lots of people are pointing in this direction, but this capacity for an implicit shared we space to create a network of cooperative capacities that are qualitatively different than the other apes, the way in which we can even, the young kids, you point, you look, there's a shared attention, intention capacity, and then to be good members that are coordinating around a particular group is a very, very strong and pretty unique human capacity. Certainly bonobos do interesting things with the way they create matriarchies, but this is, you're absolutely right. I would certainly concur that it's primate, but about 1 million to 500,000 years ago, our primate heritage before our cultural justification system laid down a social networking capacity for intersubjective we space that's different than all the others as far as we can tell. That's at least
and I'm relying on Sarah Hrdy, HRDY, her work and her colleagues on this shift and the importance of the cooperative nesting. She calls it cooperative breeding, which sounds a little offensive, I think.
No, she's a great, anthropologist, primatologist. I can't remember exactly what her history is, but she wrote Mothers and Others, and it's a wonderful, it has lots of brilliant things to say about this, 100%.
Right. Okay, so we've done the birth, breastfeeding, allo parents, and touch. And then we have the positive climate. We separate that one out. That's the welcoming climate that fosters the positive emotions of play and love and care. And we can see this in the reports of the hunter-gatherer societies, that they spend a lot of time enhancing one another's well-being, and having fun and enjoying one another, rather than having emotional climate of despair or anger or humiliation or fear, right? Those are all things that shape the brain differently then. So that's the welcoming climate. And we find in our research with adults who report on their childhoods that those with more of the evolved nest in general have more secure attachment. They're better able at taking perspectives of others, and they're more open-hearted versus those who don't have it.
Interesting. Open-hearted, like in a trait openness sense, or open-hearted in a...
They report then being oriented to relationships.
And more relational.
Rather than oppositional or, or withdrawn. Personally distressed.
So if we put this in unified theory language on the matrix, there's the filiation. This is the capacity to identify with others across a wide variety of different networks and foster belonging, connection, shared interests, as opposed to the dominance blue line that's going to rank competitive, or distancing line that's a green line of, we need freedom, we can't be too enmeshed. My understanding of a lot of what cultural hunter-gatherer societies tend to do is to foster affiliation and autonomy simultaneously, and they really downplay, sort of egoic rank competition.
Right, that's right. Yeah, so you have you follow your impulses essentially, and those impulses though have been well raised, so they don't take you outside of an empathic kind of corral or fencing, right? You don't do things to kill someone else or to harm them, because you were immersed in this very loving, supportive environment where you were treated as a sacred being. You might be grandfather reincarnated, for heaven's sake. So, the child carefully then. And that's pretty, common around the world. And so you have a sense of being connected always to others. And why would you break those bonds? You do it accidentally, and then you need some healing about it, but you don't do it on purpose. That's insanity. The self-interest that Marshall Sahlins has a little book called The Western Illusion of Human Nature. And he says self-interest, that would be insane or immoral. all over the world. And yet that's what we think is normal in the
Yep.
Western dominant culture, you know.
No, that's something else. The Enlightenment was a little bit of swing and a miss on the Enlightenment there.
Enlightenment.
right. That a little ironic twist of that.
Little ego inflation.
Egoic blue line activity where somebody justified shit that they probably shouldn't have.
Yeah, so let's see. Then we have play, self-directed free play. So this is not organized sports activities. This is not game board activities, although that might be on the borderline, but this is like playing chase, tag, climbing trees, hide and seek, wrestling, that kind of where you have to learn to control yourself to keep the play going, or the partner will leave if you get too aggressive, right? And so it's building the brain, turning on genes of all kinds, helping you control aggression, build leadership skills, social skills, growing that right hemisphere even later in life as an adult. Therapists suggest, go learn to dance, for these, I'm thinking of Dan Siegel. He talks about couples coming in after the empty nest. And the woman's ready to go see the world, and the guy just wants to sit in his man cave, and do nothing except, hit the remote. And so he sees that as a right hemisphere underdevelopment, which shows up then later, right? It shows up in different ways throughout life. But at that point, he suggests then go learn to dance, go learn to do art or do something. I suggest go play with a young child, because you have to be in the present moment to grow that right hemisphere. It's going to grow. It will grow at any point. And so play with a kid who's going to, just be silly and run around. And in my classes with my students, we learn folk song games. So things like hunting, we will go where you're doing, people walking through, and it's like catch them, and then the circle gets bigger, and then everyone's trying not to get caught, but then they eventually all get caught, and you're singing and you're talking, you're looking at each other, and all sorts of games like that, because I was a music teacher. And we learn these games so that they feel social joy in the moment, because a lot of our kids are not having enough of that experience. They're sitting alone in their cribs, playpens with screens on TV, whatever it is. No, that's not how you build a social, capacious person. And so these games get people in the moment, and then we would teach them to kindergartners. And then the kids, the undergraduates, would watch these kindergartners go, and they're jumping around. It's like, oh my God, look at how much fun they're having. And that inspires them to be a little more silly,
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, my mom is an award-winning educator and professor of early childhood education. So I know what a good kindergarten teacher looks like through her. And it's all this social play, creativity, exploration, positive communal engagement. I mean, just you really are describing her classroom in a really nice way here. So
marvelous. Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of kindergartners aren't doing that anymore.
And teachers are leaving. It's a nightmare, vicious cycle. The creative, the freedom to create the real dynamic participatory relations is now trying to regulate stuff so much, and then they regulate it right out. And then the people that are actually doing it, at least this is my mom's narrative, people that are like wanting to do it are not really well suited to do it. And the people that are well suited to create this dynamic relational oral indigenous, is like, no, I can't live in this world. So they leave. So there's a dearth of it's a real problem, in our educational system.
And then there's a focus on reading in kindergarten.
It drops everybody out of the 6-year development, right?
Because it's right hemisphere.
Yeah.
It's the right brain that's supposed to be developing through experiences. You're supposed to be collecting life experience, and the right hemisphere does that. And then it transfers to the left to, and analyze, and then sends it back for intuitive analysis too. And kids who don't play, who don't get out, they're just sitting in front of screens. They're not collecting anything, right? So then you can manipulate them with information, false information, because they have nothing to go on. They have no world experience. And it's really deprivation. And that kindergarten period in the early first 6 years is really important, but so is the rest of childhood for that.
Yeah. Okay. Beautiful.
I mentioned responsive relationships. So that means with multiple people so that you learn how to adjust to these new people, but they're the same stable relationships across time, especially important in the first 6 years. And because there's evidence that if you only have mom to relate to, that you get pretty stiff about relationships. You get scripted in your relationship, right? And expectations. So you need to be more flexible, and that's what this community provides. Then
they give you a rich repertoire of working models, both in the real world and then that you carry around with you to apply.
Yep. So birth, breastfeeding, touch, climate, play, alloparents, and responsiveness, responsive relationships. And there's two more. One is the nature connection. So our species evolved with the natural world, co-evolved with all sorts of relationships with, especially microorganisms. We're filled with microorganisms keeping our bodies alive. 90 to 99% of the genes we carry are not human. They're the microorganisms that we carry. So when you talk about genetic competition, what does that mean?
We're actually walking ecologies, people.
Yeah. That's right. And so that breast milk is really important for populating a good microbiome. And nature connection is critical for our mental health. So earthing, lying on the ground, actually restores our energy. We're in bodies of energy. Sunning is so important. And just feeling like we are safe out in the natural world. So connected to this tree, related and partnering with this river, concerned about the health of this mountain or whatever it is, that's part of our heritage. And we have really isolated ourselves, civilization, we've walled in not only our psyches, but God, put God inside in the church building. Whereas, Aquinas said there's two ways to God. One is the Bible, the other is nature.
Sign me up.
Right, let's go. Unfortunately, we're killing off all sorts of diversity. We're at the four horsemen of the apocalypse now, right? The massive toxification of soil, air, water. We have wildlife extinction all over the place of all kinds, insects. I try to have a very insect-friendly yard. My husband used to roll his eyes at me, but now he's a little more amenable to it. Other people poison their yards, right? But they all come over here. Yay, I saw a few bees today, wow.
Right.
And we also then have climate instability, right? And atmosphere degradation. So that's the four horsemen of the apocalypse.
Okay, that's good to get that list. Yep. No, I'm familiar with those, but I haven't heard that frame exactly, but that sounds about right.
Yeah, E.O. Wilson predicted that or mentioned those in the early 90s, actually. So there's probably more. The Millennial Eco Assessment assessment of the UN said that we are virtually every ecosystem on the planet is under duress from human activity. And that was in 2005. So anyway, so our nature connection is so it's that Wendell Berry, the activist poet, said, we know all this stuff about how to treat the natural world and how to, be more responsible. No, it's not working to know stuff. You got to feel it. You have to feel connection. It all turns on affection, he said. And so that's what we did an experiment that was published last year where we had undergraduates in two conditions. One was conservation condition. The other one was the ecological attachment condition. They came into the lab and took a pretest, and then they were randomly assigned. Well, before that, they were randomly assigned to them one of the conditions, and then they read some information about their condition. So it was facts, an essay, and a poem about why it's important and all that. And then they were presented with about 40 different activities, and they picked 21 of those that were related to their condition to take with them. And then for the next 3 weeks, they pick one out of the envelope and do that all day. So for conservation was turn off the faucet when you're brushing your teeth, turn off the lights when you leave the room. For the ecological attachment condition, it was things like pay attention to the clouds today, acknowledge the trees you walk by on campus today. Right? And so then they came back for a post-test, both of them increased in mindfulness, ecological mindfulness, but only the ecological attachment actually increased in ecological empathy, which is what we're trying to get to, right?
Nice. Interesting.
And so we have, I put those activities into something the public can do at ecoattachmentdance.dance. And they can do one thing a day, pick one's 28 days. So nature connection is really important for our mental health, for the well-being of the planet. Yeah,
totally. There's a whole, Fix may or may not know, there's actually now a established branch journal called Eco-Psychology, where folks are really attending to our relationship to the environment at multiple levels, but certainly one of them is our affection, attachment, embodiment in nature itself and how we feel in that relationship. And many people really do feel like we're nature famished, we're completely alienated from that, and that there's definitely many good reasons to believe that shrinks our soul, as it were.
Yeah, our paper was published in Eco-Psychology. Richard Louv calls it nature deficit disorder.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was actually couldn't quite access that, whatever neuron, but that's exactly what I was looking for. Yeah,
I like the famished though. That's a good word for it. All right, then the last one is healing practices, routine healing practices. So in our ancestral context, there are the San Bushmen, for example, several times a week. They'll have dances and trance dancing for grief. And then there's your individual healing or relational bonding or respect for the natural world. A lot of those for the Native Americans, their regular routines. So we, as the animal who can make the most, has the most capacity to make decisions, often makes a lot of mistakes. And so we need to restore the balance of our relationships with the natural world, with one another, in our own selves, right? So we can develop self-doubt when something goes wrong or something. So these routine healing practices are then aimed at restoring that balance. You can let go of grief, let go of resentment, let go. You can be here now. Your heart is here. You're open. You're flexible. You're attuned in the moment, and not controlled by conditioned responses or fears or whatever it was you didn't finish healing. Right?
Sure, of course. Wow. Somehow I'd missed that. That's beautiful and so crucial to. More. My basic frame is that we're this stacked body, heart, mind, cross paths. What's the coherent integrated flow? Negative events, negative feelings, conflicts, et cetera, happen. And then the question is, how does that get metabolized into the structure or not, right? And so much of what's going on now is just an inability to coherently metabolize the stack, as it were. And so just to hear a system where you would have regular capacities to take time out, to create the space to metabolize healing, take acknowledgement of this, be present with that and do that, have that built into the structure in a systemic, ritualized, rich spiritual way. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And imagine doing it around a fire.
Yeah. Like with that group. I wonder we're half human over here. Shit.
Yeah. So that's the evolved nest.
Yeah, it's glorious.
It's only those first two things that are only babies, right? Birth and breastfeeding. Right. But the rest of it, we need it all.
Yeah. No, and so this is the thing to really understand. This is the richness of what we mean by nature. Is to structure the fundamental understanding of ourselves in relationship to each other, in relationship to Mother Earth, and create we are built for a particular kind of expected developmental trajectory. When that gets net and stacked and channeled in a particular way, voila, obviously things can happen, but when we deviate enormously from that. And I think about the I'm glad psychology is maybe moving in the right direction, but some of the unbelievable errors of our hyper-rationalistic scientific structure, which of course then are just embedded from the modernist Enlightenment, in quotes, sets of ideas. It's really, I hope we'll be able to wake up pretty soon here.
Yes, there's a lot going on at the local levels around the world. Just that the power structures are just so leaden So
no, we've built it.
welfare,
We're right. We're on a, we're in an institutional structure that's got so much inertia and power structures that are going to maintain that inevitably. So I don't know. So that there are a couple of other things that I definitely want to sort of. So we have the nest, and then one of the things that I'm really interested in relationship to that is this concept of wisdom, which you mentioned in this book, and I believe that you've actually. In terms of your own developmental morality, have really looked at indigenous populations and their wisdoms, maybe even doing that recently. I'd love to hear your reflections about the concept of wisdom and where you are in relationship to thoughts about that idea.
Yeah. So Four Arrows and I have a book in press on restoring the kinship worldview, which is a wise way to live. I'm going to get the list here from my computer, but we have 28 precepts that we talk about. And he, in a prior publication, actually had 40. And, this is a lot of right brain way to live, right? That the left brain always likes to sort things and name them. And so it's just a sample of what it really entails, because a lot of things can't be put into words, or you have to experience it to understand it. And so
actually, my friend John Vervaeke makes another kind of critique against the Enlightenment. It was that one of the shifts was that, if you just analytically understood stuff and you just learn how to manipulate things, you'd come to your logical conclusions, whereas virtually all other developmental philosophies were like, no, there's the embodied developmental experience of learning that's required to enact this, rather than high level procedural analytic deductive stuff that then allows you to sort of draw a conclusion through logical analysis. So I'll just make that comment as we set this up here.
It's good. Even Piaget knew that, right? He studied the implicit cognition to begin with, right? But he was interested in when people could articulate a scientific whatever knowledge and stuff. So that was just his focus, because he was shaped by Western philosophy in what is important, and that's reasoning and articulation of reasoning. So the dominant worldview. So I'll just give a few examples. Right, it has orientation to hierarchy. The indigenous worldview is not non-hierarchical, and that means even with the biocommunity, that you're not better than the plant or the animal. You have to be respectful in your relations. Dominant view is fear-based rather than courageous and fearless. Trust in the universe, which is the indigenous perspective. And there's an understanding that you can become afraid, but they have methods for working through the fear into courage. Being aware that when you are afraid, you're more easily hypnotized by authorities, by words, and you can move then into the harmful behavior. So you have to understand how you're hypnotizable and work against that. And so Four Arrows has done considerable work in that area. Life is socially purposeful rather than doing whatever you want, or not feeling connected to the community. There's an emphasis on community welfare then, not personal gain. Respect for various gender roles and fluidity rather than rigid stereotypes for gender. Non-materialism, that they practice generosity, really important central virtue, to give away something you really love to someone else, and to keep the gifts flowing. So in Thomas Whitlock's work on sharing shows that sharing and generosity is just a fundamental practice, and it's not reciprocity. It's not exchange. It's not reciprocity. It's the people who need more get more, and that's babies, of course, but old people or someone impaired or whatever. And there's just no sense of keeping track. It's just the way the world works, and we know that's true about nature.
Fundamental pro-social identity, basically, just baked in.
Yeah, and the natural world is that way. It's always giving. giving and giving and giving, and people take, right? And our waste is some other animal's food, right? Or some, so it's this cycle of a gift economy that we forgot, or capitalism stops, prevents from working. Then Earth systems are considered as living and loving, so that you can trust the natural world rather than be afraid of it or control it or manipulate it, but you partner with it instead. The emphasis of heart over head, which we've been talking about. And competition is only for building positive potential, not to win over another, but to build your own skills, improve your own skills. So even in like a game, soccer, football, or something, the native team will maybe score a goal or something, and then they'll lay back a bit and let the other team score, because you're working on your own skills. You're not trying to win anything. Or if there's a rope contest where you have, you're pulling the two sides, pulling the rope over the something. Once this side starts to win, some people from this side will go to that side to help them. I'm sorry, some on the winning side will go and help the losing side to try to balance it out. So it's more about fun than about winning. The winning thing is that, again, the survival systems, the territoriality, and the fear of not being dominant is all that old primate.
Right. Old and new. Chimpanzee in particular. Those guys are particularly brutal.
Yeah, well, yeah. And then there's empathy, very empathic, animistic, biocentric. So a sense of that the world is sentient. Everything has its livingness, consciousness of some kind. Words are sacred, and truthfulness is essential. You can see our society has really gone in the other direction.
Fair amount of bullshit in this society, I would say.
Yeah, right. So you are careful with what you say. And so the Native Americans, when the explorers came to North America, they thought, are these people insane? Because they're lying. They couldn't believe they would lie. Because that's not a human thing to do. So they started to have pity on them. Truth is multifaceted, right? So there's an ability in our ancestral context for polysemy. Have you heard of that? That's where you understand things could be more than one thing. So this might be a chair, but it might be an elephant, or so that's a very a sense of a fluctuating dynamic universe, and there's no set identity for anything. So even a person's name will shift depending on the mood. The people he's with, they'll call him something else, or so there's no rigidity in categorization. The left brain stuff. This is the very right brain creative stuff. Flexible boundaries and interconnected systems rather than rigidity. Regular use of alternative consciousness. So not being afraid. And then learning how to control that or to go in and out of it. Shamans do this, of course, and then they travel to other into the future sometimes, or into another place, and that's taken for granted. Even being able to predict the future or know what's coming, but we think, oh, that's crazy, the left brain like that. It's too uncontrollable. The recognition of spiritual energies. So that transpersonal, transrational understanding that the manifest there's like spiritual laws, and you have to pay attention to those as well, things you can't see, but you intuit or you learn to recognize. So I call it receptive intelligence. We're missing that now because we don't let kids just sit outside and babies and, learn from all the entities
observe
around
and pull in and perceive.
High interpersonal engagement and interconnectedness, lots of touching. So this is the nest kind of stuff. Inseparability of knowledge and action. So it's embodied knowledge.
Yep. Okay.
Resistance to authoritarianism. Yeah. Time is cyclical, not linear. intolerance of injustice, and that means for the natural world as well.
Can you say a little bit about where this list came from? How did you guys arrive at this list?
This is Four Arrows list.
Okay.
Originally, he has been working in the area of indigenous worldview for some time, and he found a paper I did where I contrasted today's characteristics with our ancestral context, and there's some overlap there. So that's why we started to collaborate in various ways.
Right. So he was surveying and just had his. Is he an indigenous person himself? As at least
he found out that he had Cherokee blood when he was an adult. He'd been Marine. There's a book written about him, Fearless, because he's had so many adventures. He's quite a unique person. He's a honky tonk piano competition winner, world honky tonk.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. So I would encourage people to look up Four Arrows books.org or .com, I think, is where you find him. So it's Don Trent Jacobs is his regular name.
Gotcha.
But he was adopted into the Lakota. He did the Sundance, and then they adopt people into their tribe.
You've had quite a bit of experience with various indigenous peoples. Is that fair? In terms of your own just kind of learning about them and even experiences in that context?
Not directly. If I'd been 20 years younger, I would have gone to live with the San Bushmen and whatever.
Right.
When I was young, we did visit various indigenous communities when we lived in Spanish-speaking countries, but that wasn't any research. It was just visiting missionaries, really. So I'm Puerto Rican, so I have Taino blood.
Okay.
So I have my own heritage that just has, I guess, become awakened more in my older age.
Well, there was some conference that you had on. Is that
yes.
At least that's what I was thinking in terms of there was a conference that bridged indigenous people.
Yes, so we had a book, Indigenous Sustainable Wisdom is the book. And we had a number of natives come. Four Arrows helped organize that.
Okay.
And we had poets, we had storytellers, as well as science and other researchers. So Robin Wall Kimmerer came. So it was really good.
Sweet. And now I know you're officially retired, right, from a Professor Emeritus. Is that, or I don't know if that's official status
Emerita.
yet? Emerita. Sorry, that's right. That's the. I should get the Latina correct, right, at that level. You would think. Good, but I appreciate that. You're working on this book. So what's retired life been like for you? How is that, and what kinds of projects are you finding yourself engaged in?
I still have a grad student who's finished another year and a half or so.
All right. That's the nature of doctoral work or master's work here.
Yeah. And I had her train in vagal tone analysis. And so we have a lot of manuscripts coming out of that. We tested, we have a longitudinal sample of moms and kids. And we tested when they were 6 years old, their vagal tone, both mom and child. And we're finding a lot of interesting findings there. So there's a lot of manuscripts going on there. I have another book with Gay Bradshaw, who's an animal specialist, and it's on the evolved nest, and it's integrating mammal mostly, parenting and the evolved nest, the human, and it's kind of with North Atlantic Books again. It's going to be fun. So that's in the works. And then I have other books like Nested Mom, Nested Baby, a little guidebook for parents that's in the works too with an artist. And I have a lot of chapters people ask me to write, so I'm doing a lot of that.
Well, you're pretty well known in these domains, so it was like, hey, we got to get a chapter from Darcia.
Yeah, I'd like to write some other books too, but one thing that I keep seeing that people don't understand is that our heritage is not to be selfish and aggressive, but that's the assumption that so many people have, and they come in and how can we be altruistic? We have a paper. I have a paper with a group of others in press for American psychologists on what we call evolving evolutionary psychology.
Oh,
so
good.
we criticize the narrow evolutionary psychology. I see it as focusing on all the pre-human stuff, the primate, whatever, it's like sex. Oh, come on. How many of us are obsessing about that? Maybe the people who wrote it, I don't know. But so we offer a depth developmental evolutionary psychology theory, and the questions for that, which, we pay attention to the evolvedness. What's species typical for raising us and for behavior? And instead of asking, how can altruism happen? We should be asking, what happened that this species has gotten so uncooperative with the natural world, like any other species?
Right. Nice. There's a book called Humanity. I'm blanking on the person's name, but I can put it in the notes also, that makes the pro-social case about our natures also. Yeah. That came out in the last year or so. I read
The Humankind.
I think so. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Thank you. But yeah, no, that's a crucial, let's face it, obviously, if we get socialized a particular way, we can be aggressive and self-centered and all of that. We have that potential, but the issue is, what is it if we are tracking our evolved nest in a particular way? The direction of our development is clear in that regard. So
yeah. So I would say if we're undercared for, neglected, traumatized, we can go at certain periods and we can move into that aggressive survival system orientation. But that's not who we are. That's not our heritage. And it certainly leads us away from wisdom.
And across virtually every wisdom tradition, I might add, so virtually all of them are pretty clear about that. Well, let me ask you this then, in terms of just kind of where we're in a really interesting time. And I like to check and see where people's sense of the kind of horizon that we are, how you make sense out of where we are. Is it an optimistic? Is it a pessimistic? Is it a very mixed feeling? What is your sense about what's on the horizon and how things are going to unfold at wherever you want to enter that very broad question?
Yes. Well, I guess in a way I'm optimistic and pessimistic. Optimistic in the way that, we're part of this living earth. And when we die, we're still part of the earth. It's like, my quarks will still be around. And I'll be here to help generate the next whatever world. The Hopis say we're in the fourth world and we destroyed all the other ones. And so it seems that's what we're doing now, unless we can shift. It's like we need a different virus. Right now we're being governed by the Wedico virus. You've heard of that? The cannibalism of life. It's like just sucking the life out of everything. Native Americans warned about that. And you can see that's Jeremy Lent in his new book, The Web of Meaning.
Yeah, no, I know that book.
He mentions that too. So I think we've got to somehow control those alphas, the alphas that are so scared that they have to have control over everyone, and hoard their resources, hoard the money for themselves. It's like, how do we get rid of them? That's the pessimism part. The optimism is we're going to be here anyway. And I certainly wouldn't be doing my work if I didn't think there was some chance that we could turn things around now. From the bottom up. I think we have to do it from the bottom up, from local transformation. But it also helps to have information about our heritages, which people again misunderstand. They think, oh, this is the way it has to be, progress, collateral damage, or we're selfish, there's nothing you can do about it, aggression, that's normal. And then they get paralyzed. So we have to work through misinformation. And we do that with relationships. Really. Yeah. But I'm hoping my work can trigger people in a positive way to actually look around them for ways they can provide the evolved nest wherever they are. Yeah. You can just, be kind to the people that you meet in the street and say hello. Totally. There's all sorts of ways to build connection, to feel connected, to build your feelings of connection, to help others feel connected, to make them laugh in a positive way, to help out. All that is what we need, rather than be afraid and hidden or aggressive, and
Right.
dominating, to learn to self-calm. And so we have 28 days of self-calming. Also on the Evolve Nest, which is also things that are science-based, and doing that, and then building social joy, the way I was talking about, the playing with others, music making and things, and then expand your imagination with the indigenous worldview to understand that the stuff we've been taught and the stuff we kind of tend to take for granted is very rare and recent and strange. We are, get back to that, unlock the gates and unlock the cage around your heart and open that up. Now people think, oh no, it's so scary. I don't want to feel my feelings. It's going to be horrible. That's why I shut them down when I was a baby, right? Because you were afraid. But once you feel them, it's actually so much liberating.
Then once you get the flow, it hurts as it happens, but then you metabolize that thing and then you realize you can actually integrate the stack through the emotion rather than control and break it off,
Think about it as like a marathon run or something. It takes, effort, and it takes pain, but boy, once you're in the flow, it's like freedom.
It's a different place.
Freedom.
Yes. Amen. Beautiful. That's really lovely. And I do want to just say, I think that, you are sort of a leading beacon around these issues. And I think the way you've articulated it, I think somewhere, maybe I'll put this, I have the Evolve Nest, I stuck it on the Tree of Life. It's like, oh, there it is, because for me, it does really speak to some of the, recaptured wisdom we need to learn, building it with the best science, with a wise view for how we can be good ancestors in the long arc of history. And so and I do feel that there is at least a awakening. And I like to think, COVID's obviously created a lot of suffering and things like that. But if one thing it does feel like is that people are waking up to the idea that, this old system did some good things for us clearly at one level, but man, it had some things seriously wrong. It's time we need a new operating system. And I think people are looking around for that. And I think they'll find a lot of beautiful wisdom in the things that you've been offering. So I do appreciate that. So thanks so much for coming on and deeply sharing this. And I look forward to posting it and sharing it. And we'll circle back around and have conversations and connections. Thanks so much. I really appreciate you coming in and doing that.
Wonderful to be with you.
All right.
Thanks, Gregg.
Take care.